You know, all those homes in all those cities that he's talking about, they're all open concept. They have no walls, they have no windows, they have no roofs, they have no basements, no kitchens, no bathrooms. In fact, Mr. Speaker, other than that, they're the best homes you can imagine, and you'll have to imagine them because after 8 years, they still don't exist.
Welcome everyone to the first episode of the Backbench Seat, your personal view into the House of Commons. This show will give you a condensed version of Question Period so that you understand what's going on in the House every day without having to watch an hour of Liberal talking points. Don't forget to subscribe to make sure you stay fully informed, and without further ado, let's jump into Question Period. Starting off QP as always is the man himself, Pierre Poilievre, who just released an epic 15-minute documentary called Housing Hell.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, for the first time in 60 years, rent is rising faster than salaries. That's according to the Bank of Montreal. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, rent has doubled, mortgage payments have doubled, and down payments have doubled too. Will the Prime Minister finally watch my documentary? It's an unprecedented, very striking, common sense documentary. And will the Prime Minister come up with a common sense plan to bring down grocery prices and build homes that people can afford and can buy?
Mr. Speaker, it's a shame that the honourable member doesn't put as much energy into generating housing policies as he does to generating housing videos. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is when I actually look at the measures he's putting forward, including in the video, they're going to result in fewer homes being constructed than we are already on pace to build. He plans to put the GST back on some home construction. He plans to cut funding for cities who are trying to build more housing, and he plans for Canada to get out of the home building game altogether.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he clearly didn't watch my common sense documentary, which is being widely acclaimed by all. If he had, he would know the facts. Our common sense plan takes the GST off for apartments that are affordable, below average cost. He wants to take it off just for $10 million penthouses. We want to take the bureaucracy out of the picture so home builders can build. He's got a $4 billion fund that, according to the city of Halifax, is funding more bureaucratic gatekeepers. So, why won't he watch the documentary, follow the common sense plan to get rid of the taxes and the bureaucracy and build more homes?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, it's fascinating. For him, it's about how many people are going to watch his Twitter videos. For me, it's about how many people are going to have a roof over their head.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
But here's the reality. People don't have roofs over their head. After 8 years of this Prime Minister and his housing minister of photo ops and media puff pieces, the rent has doubled, mortgage payments have doubled, down payments have doubled. In his own home province, in Halifax, they now have 30 homeless encampments. 9 out of 10 young people say they will never be able to afford a home. And what have they done? Create a $4 billion housing accelerator that 2 years later hasn't completed a single solitary house.
What Pierre is referencing is the Liberal Housing Accelerator Fund, a $4 billion program to build 100,000 homes by 2024-25, but has yet to build a single house. The Conservatives continued to hammer Trudeau over housing costs, an election strategy that seems to be working.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this NDP-backed Liberal Prime Minister, the cost of homes and rent has doubled. Mr. Speaker, it's so bad in St. John's that one man ignored his bail hearing so that he could be sent to jail instead of spending a cold, wet, homeless winter on the streets. When petty criminals choose dilapidated jail cells like those at Her Majesty's Penitentiary over homelessness, it's clear that this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. So will the Prime Minister commit to ending the homeless crisis, or does he take pleasure in seeing people choose jail over homelessness?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think any member of this House of any party takes any pleasure in seeing anyone in this country live on the street, and it would be a shame if the honourable member were suggesting that was the case.
The Conservative Party stuck with their affordability messaging, this time exposing the harms of the carbon tax on First Nations in Canada.
After 8 years of the Liberal NDP government, they plan on quadrupling their carbon tax scam to crush families, farmers, and First Nations further. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. He refuses to tell his senators to stand down and pass common sense Conservative Bill C-234 to take the tax off our farmers. Even First Nation communities, more than 100, are fed up and taking this government to court over the carbon tax, saying it's disproportionate and an unfair burden to them. When will the Prime Minister take the carbon tax off families, farmers, First Nations, finally?
Hear, hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And for the fourth or fifth time, I'd like to remind the Conservatives that the only senators that sit in a caucus sit in their Conservative caucus, and the Senate is in fact independent, Mr. Speaker. And I would actually like to raise the fact that the Conservatives have had this really troubling trend of bullying, particularly female senators, whenever they're not getting what they want out of the Senate, and that's a real problem, Mr. Speaker. That's a problem for democracy, and they should reconsider how they manage their affairs on Twitter.
This is coming from the guy that swore at a girl in her DMs. After 8 years, the Liberal NDP government's empty acts of reconciliation are not worth the cost. A recent Auditor General report proved the carbon tax is an unfair burden on Indigenous communities, something that the Chiefs of Ontario reiterated just last week.
I think the Conservatives can find the moral high ground on the First Nation file in many ways, but carbon tax affordability is one you can expect to hear more about. Meanwhile, the Liberals only offer virtue signaling.
Mr. Speaker, on this 10th day of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, it is crucial to highlight the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2S LGBTQI+ people is ongoing. Can the Honourable Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations shed light on the specific actions that this government is currently undertaking to address the ongoing crisis? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member for her hard work and her advocacy. The ongoing national crisis of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and 2S LGBTQI+ people must come to an end.
Now, the whole point of question period is for the opposition parties to hold the governing party accountable. I really hate that the government can waste time asking themselves questions to make them look good. The last part of question period hammered the Liberals over the developing story of 1,600 temporary foreign workers coming into Canada for a battery plant in Windsor, a deal that the Liberals have been carefully covering up the details of.
After 8 years, the NDP Liberal government has turned their backs on Canadian labour. The government is bringing in 1,600 taxpayer-funded foreign replacement workers for the battery assembly plant in Windsor. That's $40 billion or $3,000 in taxes per household. Conservatives have been consistently demanding the release of these contracts publicly, but the NDP have flip-flopped and are working with the Liberals to keep the contracts secret, to hide these bad contracts. When will the Liberals and the NDP stand up for Canadian auto workers and release the contracts?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, now either the Conservative leader takes us all for fools, or he thinks the Canadian public was in a coma for the last 20 years.
The NDP have turned their back on Canadian workers to back this Prime Minister and his secret deal to bring in overseas replacement workers. It's clear that after 8 years, this Prime Minister isn't worth the cost to Canadian workers. The NDP member for Windsor voted to keep secret the contracts from Canadian taxpayers. So if the NDP Liberal government have nothing to hide, then why not show Canadians the details that's going to cost them $3,000 per family? So will the Prime Minister finally release the contract details so Canadians can see how many replacement workers $40 billion buys?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Contrary to what the Conservatives claim, our government has always been clear regarding jobs created by investments like LG Stellantis. But maybe the Conservatives should stop fear-mongering and read the Globe and Mail.
I want to read the contract. I want to see the contract. Where's the contract?
We were doing so well right to about there.
And that's what happened in question period today. Let me know what you guys thought about that style of video if you found it useful, and please don't forget to subscribe and watch this video next.